Hey, I'm Alan Furstenberg,
Hi, I'm Sam Witteveen.
and welcome back to Two Voice Devs. Sam, great to have you back. Last time uh, I had to cut you off because we were having such a good conversation, but
We're going over time.
there was so much more that we wanted to cover. Um, but we had you had kind of teased this notion about how uh, all the models were using these new RL techniques,
Right.
including the Chinese models. So we have the big three from Google, Anthropic, and OpenAI, but there's a world out there of other models that's going on. What should people be looking at? What are the other models we should be looking at, and why?
So definitely there are a whole bunch of sort of open weights companies, mostly in China. We've got Mistral, which is in France. It's more sort of European based. They're a little bit of a mixture of
It
proprietary and open.
it's funny. I feel like I heard a lot about Mistral 2 years ago. I don't feel like I've heard nearly as much of them since.
They've they're yeah, like definitely there's just lots of competitors now, right? They're still plugging away, they're still releasing models, every now and then. Their sort of customer base is definitely the EU, right? It does seem to me that like that's what they're focused on, that they're obviously legally they're compliant for sort of EU use and stuff like that. Whereas I think the Chinese companies, haven't been as focused on that kind of thing. I think they are paying attention to things like that, though. A number of the Chinese companies now have reached out to me and sort of said that, hey, look, we want to reach people in the West as well, and we've seen a lot of feedback on your channel and stuff like that, and I've now got sort of ways of back channeling with a number of those companies, which is kind of interesting. And at the end of the day, I think like most companies, they just want people to use their models, right? I, you know, obviously in probably the sort of biggest one that people would know, most people would know, would be DeepSeek, right? That was the one that brought down a huge valuation in Nvidia because they kind of worked out how to make some shortcuts on a lot of how this training was done. Um, the I will say that it is interesting that the attempts to try and suppress the model training in China by not letting Nvidia sell there and stuff just hasn't worked. Whether they've found ways to get around that and get hardware, often though, it's more just that they've found ways to be much more efficient with older hardware than
Interesting.
than companies in the West. And DeepSeek was the classic one of that. Um, and I think when the DeepSeek model came out, it really kind of blew people away because they were kind of like, oh wow, this model is actually of a very high standard, compared to the proprietary models. Now there are lots of arguments about did they distill the models from OpenAI or something like that? Did they basically, keep a lot of training data from OpenAI and use that? It's just come out as we're recording that, Anthropic has said that they've had people from almost all the Chinese labs trying to attack them with lots of accounts to create training data.
And we know that one of the when Google first released their thinking models, it used to be that you could see the exact thoughts that were going on, and now all you see are thought summaries. So that they
Yeah, so
realized that the thoughts were giving away too much information.
yeah, so like OpenAI basically was the first one to do that, the thought summaries stuff. Google at the start had for flash thinking where you could see some of the thinking and stuff like that. And it's fascinating when you do see the thinking of one of these models. Um, it really is a lesson, I kind of feel, in how to think. Like, I think actually humans could learn a lot from these. I certainly did looking at it, of just how it breaks it down into sort of chunks. I'm sure you've heard the thing of like humans have like 7 ± 2 bits of information that they can hold, and then that's it, kind of thing, right? This sort of thinking operates in a similar way, right? That you can't be thinking about everything at the same time. So, how do you break this down? What questions do you ask about what the user just prompted you to actually come up with the right answer? Once you've come up with an answer, how do you ask yourself about that answer? All those kinds of things. Now, we've got summaries of it. Um, of course it would be, in a perfect world we would have the raw thinking. It makes a lot of sense though for the commercial sort of things of why people don't want to make that available. And distillation is the main one, right? Is they
Yeah.
don't want people distilling these kinds of things. That said, at the same time, the Chinese companies have been very heavily focused on lots of different sizes of models. They go right up to sort of, I won't say huge models, but sort of mid-tier models, but then right down to things that can run on a phone. And the Qwen models, like Qwen 3, there was like a 600 million parameter one, a 1.7 billion parameter, then a 4 billion, then like an 8 or 9 billion, then like there was just all these different sizes. So people could then take these models, um, because they released the base model, you could actually fine tune it for whatever you wanted to use it for and do your own post training, and even your own sort of continued pre training if you wanted to for those sorts of things. And those models got very popular for that, right? And still, I think when we look at things like Olama, when we look at things like LLM Studio, those models, perhaps along with the Gemma models, the Gemma 3 models, maybe GPT OSS, to some degree as well, have been the sort of mainstay models that people are using locally on their machine. The challenge is on people's machines, once you get above a 32 kind of model, and certainly a 70 billion parameter model, most people can't run that on their machine, right? They just don't have enough RAM. They don't have,
Right.
what's needed for that.
But kind of what we, as we discussed before, for 90% of what people are trying to do, that's fine. We don't need these huge LLM models just to do um, you know, basic request understanding, for example. Yes,
No,
if
no,
we were trying to do deep logic, yeah, you're going to need the bigger ones, but most tasks don't require that.
they definitely have caught up in the past 2 years. The local models have gotten so much better. Now they're still not as good at things like tool calling and stuff like that. The sort of just the last recent batch that have come out of China over we've just had Chinese New Year last week. They all love to release just before Chinese New Year. That's their sort of like their thing. And so literally, we had a Qwen model, a GLM 5.0 model, a Minimax 2.5 model, a Kimi 2.5 model. The only one that was kind of surprisingly missing was DeepSeek, right? And everyone was sort of expecting a big release from DeepSeek. And there could be multiple reasons for that. I think they had some sort of little previews and stuff like that, but they didn't release what people were hoping that they would release. These latest batch of models definitely have gotten a lot better at tool calling, a lot better at the agentic stuff. And I think we're seeing the different, one of the things that we're seeing that we didn't touch on in the last episode was that the reason why latency has become so important now in the proprietary models, in fact, all models, is that the way people are using them is different. People are not just doing the chat GPT, I'm going to type in and get an answer back, I'm going to type something, right?
One shot
People are
request,
now
request response. Yeah.
yeah, people are now much more sort of using them in an agentic way where you might have something spin up in parallel with multiple agents doing lots of different tasks, each bringing it back, combining it, sending them off, getting tool calls, running off to tools, all this sort of stuff. And that's something that I think, we're just we're kind of like still at the tip of the iceberg for that, right? That's going to get a lot more. We're going to see that a lot more this year. We've already seen it, I guess, we've already sort of seen it with both the, Claude Code. The biggest inflection we've probably seen in the past few months has been Claude Code around the sort of holiday, end of year holidays last year, right? Everyone, or certainly a lot of people in the developer community went on holidays, fired up Claude Code, and realized, holy crap, this can do amazing things. I could use this in my day-to-day job, right? And literally this time, last year, I can remember talking to people working at big companies in the States that they weren't allowed to use any of these models for
Right.
their code bases, right? And it was sort of like around Google I/O that people were then being told, like, it literally changed in like 2 months from being You're not allowed to use it to generally something like, okay, we've bought Cursor for all of you, try it out. Or to, and then the next month it was kind of like, okay, we're happy to pay for whatever you want to use because as people saw productivity go up, right? We've seen this now at Anthropic where they're talking about that most of the code is written by the models and stuff like that.
Yeah, and I think Google. What was it that Sundar said a few months back about how it was something like 75% or 95% of all their code was now.
Yeah,
I don't
like
think
so
he said,
about
he didn't say written by AI. He said uh, AI was part of the process.
So the funniest one I saw like that was I think it was around September last year. I went to a DeepMind event and Jeff Dean was speaking. And Jeff's got a very funny sense of humor, right? He obviously super intelligent, super on top of all this stuff. Someone in the audience asked him, "Okay, like you say that these things can write code and stuff like that, but when will it be good enough that it can write the code for an airplane, right? That can write all the code for an airplane?" And so Jeff Dean kind of paused his presentation and he sort of, does think, looks, then he goes back to the guy and says, "Are there humans on the airplane?" And what his point was, and then he went on to basically say that he kind of thought sort of like mid 2026, in that sort of time frame, we would sort of see this. And it's held pretty true, right? Like if you look at it now, we're at a point where these models are able to write huge chunks of code by themselves. Uh, Now, for mission critical stuff, yeah, you're always gonna, want to have extra checks and extra verifications and things like that. And so maybe, yeah, maybe it's a little bit longer for something like an airplane, but we're fundamentally seeing this change, right? And we're also seeing the devs that are on board versus the devs that are not. Right. So I think this is like a really interesting sort of topic for your audience, right? It is that
This is one that we keep drifting back to every so often.
right.
Um, Mark and I have opinions on this, but I'm curious on yours now.
I kind of feel that you have to jump on board, right? I see in my own team, I see people that who could never code writing code. Right now they're not writing maybe they're not writing things in C++ or things like that, but they're making tools for themselves with Python. They're making Next.js sites with JavaScript and with TypeScript. They don't understand the code. But they've learned the loop of write me what I want, and then get the feedback from from when I run it. This is what the errors came out. As the models get better at being able to tell people, the errors, that can actually be joined up. So one of the best things about
Right.
anti-gravity is literally that, right? Is that it can actually spin up a browser, run whatever it's written, look
And
at it
go
in the
test it itself.
browser,
Yeah.
say, "Hey, oh, I messed up that div there. Let me go back and fix that." And and this becomes this agentic loop, right? This is the whole sort of thing. And so I think we've got people like that. Then we've also got other people, which some devs I see, who just refuse to, or maybe not refuse, but are reluctant to get on board because they're still like, "Oh yeah, but I tried it last year and it didn't work." The thing is with AI, it's literally like, did you try it last week? If you tried it last week and it didn't work, okay, maybe this week it's not going to work,
Right.
right?
So here, I mean, my experience on it has so far been decent. I will routinely encounter a problem, toss it over to Gemini CLI, look at and look at what comes back. And usually these are still relatively small tasks that I'm giving it. And a good 80% of the time, its results are fine. It's at 20% that it gives me a result back and I'm like, of those, half of them are maybe I'll look at it and I'm like, it kind of looks fine. And when I try it, it seems to run fine until I hit a weird edge case and suddenly it just, blows up. And the other half of the time I'm looking at it and I'm like, that will not do what you just said it will do. I can see that. I don't need to run it. I can see that. Um Is
Yeah,
it get,
they're definitely not perfect, right? And
they're not
I
per
think
and but I think your point of the agentic loop now being an integral part of that whole process, so that it's getting that immediate feedback of, is this solution good or not, that's reasonable. I feel like what I'm seeing still, though, is it says, oh, that's not going to work. Either it notices that's not going to work, or I've just told it it's not going to work, and it says, oh yeah, here's that fix, and I'm like, no, that's still wrong. And I feel like I still am seeing them getting stuck in this loop of trying fixes that are not working, and they're never going to work. Whatever corner it has boxed itself into, it never takes that step back that a human might say and say, yeah, this I took a totally wrong approach. Let me try this all again. It never reaches that point.
it,
And I feel like it gets there far too often.
okay. There are a few reasons for that. All right, let's sort of look at what's actually going on here and what's actually changing. So you've got two key parts to this. You've got the models, right, which we've mostly talked about in the last episode and a bit in this episode, right? The second part, though, is the harness, right, or the scaffold around the model. We've seen over the past couple of years, you yourself have been heavily involved with like LangChain, right, as one of the sort of agent building frameworks slash harnesses. Um, we've seen advances both in the models, but also in the harnesses. And we're really at the point now where things like Claude Code in particular, that model harness relationship have been optimized for each other.
Yes.
Uh, and this is something that you've got to wonder around companies like LangChain and stuff like that. So one of the things I didn't mention in the intro about me is I do a podcast for VentureBeat, and literally just last week we interviewed Harrison Chase, and in that that'll be out I think in a week or two or something like that. The full sort of podcast for that. That in that we talk about this sort of concept, and Harrison makes a lot of really interesting points around that. And I think this is one of the things that LangChain is going to have a challenge, right? That they're trying to build something that works with all the different models, whereas the Claude Code team, they're just building something that works with
With
Claude,
Claude.
right?
Yeah.
They don't care about the OpenAI models. They don't care about the Gemini models. The Gemini CLA team, they're working with just something that works with Gemini. Obviously, the Codex team, with OpenAI, right? So the thing that we're seeing more and more is that as people optimize the harness for the model and then train the model for the harness, we get this really nice sort of feedback thing. Now, is it perfect yet? No, it's not perfect, right? It will depend a lot on the tools that you use. Personally, I would say at the moment that Claude Code is definitely the best coding harness and model system, of working together. The interesting thing there, though, is that everyone else is trying to catch up, right? That like they got there first, but that doesn't mean that sort of, a month from now we will see, they'll still necessarily be first, or they'll still hold that lead. Now,
Right.
they might hold more mind share of just people get used to using Claude Code, that they continue to use it. This is where, Cursor did very well at the start. This is where OpenAI's, Codex has been trying to get mindshare. Obviously, Gemini CLI, obviously anti-gravity, right? Anti-gravity, again, is another one that's come along and really worked hard of making that harness work with those Gemini 3 models.
Yes.
Not even the Gemini, not even the earlier Gemini models, because when they were acquired as, from Windsurf and brought across, it was kind of known that, like you're making this harness for Gemini 3, and it literally only got released the week, that Gemini 3 came out.
They were released at the same time. Yes.
Yeah.
One of the things I think this also brings up is that we call them models still. We talk about the Gemini 3 model. It's more than just a model now. It's, as I like to put it, it's 3 models in a trench coat at this point. It's, you have the kind of filtering model that looks at the request and says, okay, which of these various other models that are built in is the best one to handle this task? And even with, I'm assuming, and you tell me how true this is, because I think you know it better than I do. Even the models that are dedicated to a particular thing, like a model is dedicated to coding, still has that pre-model as part of it that is determining, where is the best way to route this kind of request.
Yeah, definitely. Like it is interesting that both Gemini and Claude, they're not training specific codex models, code models, right? Like OpenAI has kind of gone for the codex model now. And the open models, we've seen people really try and specialize with code models. I the general thinking there is that if you can get a model to be good at code, it's probably going to be good at logic. It's probably going to be good at other tasks that turn out to be really useful. Um, Anthropic in particular has really sort of shown this now with their co-work, which is kind of like Claude Code, but for non-coders, right? It's basically like, hey, it can see your desktop, it can see, it's got access to a browser, it can go and do a bunch of different things for you, can fill out spreadsheets for you, it can, run all these kinds of things. Um, and the fundamentally the model is the same, right? The good model there is the Opus 4.6 model. It works really well in both Claude Code and Claude Cowork. So I think like that's also the direction that the Gemini team is going. That they want to have like really strong models. Um, Perhaps you could argue that they're not uh, maybe they're not as focused on code as the Anthropic team is, right? Gemini and Google obviously have lots of customers already, right? They've got people that want to use stuff for, and it was amazing just with last week, we saw that I think it's like the Gemini app now is up to 750 million users or something like that worldwide. I
Wow.
it's like it's taken off, right? And obviously that they want to pull back market share from ChatGPT, which came out
Yes.
early, and that kind of thing, right? So their goal may not be coding at all cost, whereas it does seem like Anthropic has gone for that.
Well, and I think the other element to that is that Google is in the position to say, we want to be able to build a model that works really, really well with all of these other tools, because we're also offering all of these other tools.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
they want to be able to say, we want the best model that can talk to Google search, because we're going to bill you for Google search. We
Yeah.
want the best model that's going to talk to a RAG database, because we offer 98 different RAG databases that you can use. Google's motivation isn't so much, let's get you right, let's find the best model to help you write code, because that's not really their business. Their business is not for you writing code.
It's perhaps not the number one priority. I think they do want to have a good, coding model, and
Right.
certainly the 3.0 when it came out was considered sort of a state of the art coding model at that time. It's just that it got replaced, within a month or so, right? And it's not that that model is any worse than it was before. It's just that other models come along, they're slightly better, and I kind of feel like developers need to be learning these tools and need to be realizing, okay, if things change like this so quickly, what's my skill set that I'm bringing to this?
Right.
This is something with my own team that I just put together a presentation for, was how to sort of approach any task in the AI age, right? What are the steps you should be thinking about? And trying to get them to realize that there are certain things now that you want to just offload to a model, right? Don't get stuck in that. Offload that, right? Your skill set is much more about curation. It's much more about taste. It's much more about these other sorts of things than trying to do, certain tasks. And this for the team as a whole, right? Not just coders, but it's something that I realize is like, okay, it requires a different way of thinking. And I do think this is fundamental for all sort of devs. Some people could make the argument it's probably true that younger devs are more open to change than us older devs, right?
It's interesting. It's really interesting. I actually saw, um, I'm not sure if it was a paper or just a survey, or what it was, but what it found was that brand new devs really into AI. Older devs really into AI. It was that middle ground
Middle.
is where they were less sure, but on each extreme was massive AI adoption. And I thought that
Yeah,
was
that's
really
interesting.
interesting.
That's very interesting.
And
I guess it kind of makes sense that the
yeah,
managers now are the ones like, because literally, like using something like Claude Code, you're a manager, right? You literally
yes,
just kick it off. You tell it, okay, you're going to go and do work on this and stuff like that. I'll check in with you in an hour's time or whatever.
right.
You
It's
come
those
back.
senior developers who are used
Yeah,
to having to having that big picture understanding,
yeah.
having this kind of high level knowledge of the whole code base and being able to delegate specific tasks now is good at delegating those specific tasks to an AI instead of a junior developer, which is kind of something that we predicted 2 years ago as a concern.
I,
Um, and the
yeah,
junior developers know how to exploit this as well.
I do feel it's going to be very tough for junior developers because they don't have enough of the experience
Yes.
of to be able to come up and sort of take those roles. And it does seem like there's just no longer a need for juniors, apprentices, this kind of thing, or certainly not as much as before, right? So then it makes it very hard for them to get jobs. It makes it very hard for them to acquire the sort of just day in day out experience of like, oh, in React that always happens, this is how
Right.
you should be
And
thinking about it, or
and
that
this was
kind of thing.
something that this was an issue I identified 2 years ago as this started happening. Was I think I said we're getting these models that are really good at replacing the junior developers. And at the moment, that seems okay. The problem is, as we start losing our senior developers, I don't think our models are going to catch up as quickly to replacing senior developers as we needed junior developers to be moving into those positions. Yeah, I think that's where the problem is going to start coming in.
I understand the argument, but I would say
You
the
disagree.
counter argument to that is that actually within by the end of this year they won't need it'll replace all developers, right? It will be able to do all those tasks. Now it won't necessarily replace the developers, but the it will have the knowledge. So I had a really interesting example myself recently with Claude Code, where I started making Mac apps and iOS apps again. With the startup that I did before, we did mobile apps, right? That was our thing. And so back in the day, I'd coded in Objective-C, I'd coded in some of this stuff. Now, obviously, all the Apple stuff has moved to Swift now, right? I kind of missed that transition. Like I was, out of doing day-to-day dev in those products. And anyway, but the interesting thing was I was able to have a conversation with the model where I could tell it, look, this is what I want. And then it would say, oh, you want Swift UI, right? Because like maybe I used UI kit or something like that before in Objective-C. Say, oh, you want Swift UI. And I would say to it, oh, is that kind of like a UI kit in Objective-C? And it'd say, oh, yeah, basically the same thing. These are the differences. This is how you could think of it. And very quickly, I've been educated on the Swift part now, right? And I could ask it like a number of things like that. Like, hey, so what is there a framework that kind of does like what this used to do, or that kind of thing? Um, and if you kind of know what you want, meaning that like okay, I know that I want a database, I know that I want this, I want that, right? How am I going to sync those? Having a conversation with this model where it's not writing code yet, it's just talking to me about sort of architecting these things are getting amazing at that kind of thing too.
That doesn't surprise me. It also occurs to me that the other big counter argument to my argument is as tools, this is in some ways no different than older tools. I mean, 2 generations ago, the senior developer was the one who understood C memory management really well and
Yes.
C code optimization really well. And over time, we built compilers that can do memory optimization and can do code optimization and branch optimization so that the senior developers didn't need that skill set as much. And everyone moved up a level. And I feel like that is where AI, that is what AI is becoming, is
Yeah,
Everyone's moving up a level.
exactly. And I think that's a great way of putting it because if you think about levels of abstraction, right? There were certain people that wrote in assembly code, right? I wouldn't have a clue
Exactly.
about that, right? Then then there was C, then there was C++. Like each abstraction above this created a new generation of developers. And this is no different, right? What we've yet to see, which I think is going to be fascinating, and maybe we are starting to see some things of this, of like languages or frameworks that are purely built by AI for AI, right? And maybe like as a human, we can interact with them, in through natural language. But really, if you think about it, if if assembly code or machine, language or whatever, if binary is the most efficient way of doing this, why doesn't the AI just write it in binary and we just basically tell it what to write and it then writes it? At the moment, we don't trust it enough. We want to actually look at that code. We want to sort of check whether it's working, be able to debug it, that kind of thing.
I think it's once. I think there's yet another reason why we don't have that, and that's because the models haven't been trained on it. The models, they don't know what they don't know what they don't know.
You would be surprised that actually a lot of the jailbreaks now are doing things in ways that machines understand them that humans don't understand them.
I
So
guess I can
things
believe that.
the models know base 64 really well, for example. That like they're actually very good at something like that. So there are, uh,
But that's because they've been
you're right
trained
that
on
like
that.
it's not being optimized for that, right?
Right. The other thing though, and what I feel like is that in the whole moving up is that we're still requiring humans to learn the patterns that the systems will understand for the coding. Because I definitely know, when I'm trying to say what I wanted to do, some things work better than others. Some ways of me
Yeah.
phrasing things work better than others. And that's kind of suggesting that we have a language. Now, it's a higher level language. It's a much higher level language, but it still has its own syntax and rules and other abstractions that are necessary to speak in order to get the LLM to give the output that we want. And again, I'm not sure that's going to change.
Hey, no, I think that will get better, right? If you look at something like GPT 3.5, right? So going back, even the Palm models that right from
Oh
Google,
God, yes. Okay.
they required lots of prompt engineering, right? And very specific prompt engineering and stuff like that. The models are getting better at generalization. Now, at the same time, we're asking it to do a lot more, right? So it hasn't perhaps generalized to all of those things perfectly yet. Um, but give it time. It does seem with each generation of model, the generalization is getting better on prompting. Of course, though, if you think about it, if you go and speak to a human,
Sure.
you're going to find that there are certain words that get what you
Absolutely.
want from that human better than other words, right? This is
Oh,
why
absolutely.
sales is a skill, right? It's like, people have to learn, oh, I need to coax you like this. I need to show you these benefits. I need to, right? And I think these models are the same kind of thing, right? The way the more you can explain it, and the more articulate you can be in what you want. I actually was looking at some really interesting prompts uh, around video models just on the weekend, and I was amazed like how detailed some of these prompts are that are getting like
Yes.
really good results, right? And to the point where some of them are in JSON. They have all these different elements to them and stuff that like I'm like, yeah, make a pretty picture, make a good video of a cat walking across the screen or whatever, right? And yeah, okay, the model will get that, but when you see one of these long prompts, it is really kind of amazing. The same is true for like Gemini 3.1 prompting for websites and stuff like that. The best prompts seem to be these prompts that have a whole bunch of detail to them that refer to certain JavaScript frameworks, refer to, certain things. And you could imagine they're exactly what you would use to tell a good front end dev of how to make this website look cool,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So bringing it back to some of these models, and in particular some of the Chinese models, or the outside of the big three models, what are the ones that you're seeing are doing really good jobs at tool calling, or helping to helping developers with functions, or helping developers write their own code, or kind of what's the best way for developers to kind of look at these other models and get used to them?
I think I think the open models are still behind the proprietary models, especially for things like coding. That said, they've gotten way better. So things like Qwen 3 Coda, one of them, um, there was a model called the Qwen 3 Next model, which the 3.5 has just come out using the same architecture. They basically made a coding version of that at one point, which a lot of people have commented like, wow, it's not as good as Opus 4.6, but it's like a small model. It can run on my computer. It costs me virtually nothing to run it, or extremely cheap to run it compared to the $15, $30 or whatever the Anthropic models are costing per million tokens. And by the way, like you can run up big bills on some of those things, right?
I was going to say let's maybe we want to touch on that
Like
too.
I have a friend that works for a very big company in the US. He writes a lot of their AI software. Um, you know, we have like our own little status thing that shows how much you've spent in this session or something, and I think I maxed it out at mine at like $500-600 or something, and his was like not quite an order of magnitude for that one session, but probably an order of magnitude for the day, right? And there are, even Anthropic has kind of said internally, there are people that are using hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of tokens, right? So you do want to be, very careful with that. Obviously, this is where the Claude Max plans actually are quite good because you can, you're not having to pay for every sort of call. Anyway, the cost is definitely an issue. The open models, definitely the Qwen 3 Next Coder or whatever. I'm not sure the exact name of it, but that was one of their recent ones that was very popular. I think we're probably going to see more come out already. People, are running things like OpenClaw with Minimax M2.5, and it's able to do all the tool calling and able to run, all the things there very well. We're also seeing, the Kimi models have gotten a lot better at tool calling as they've gone out to some of these things, and even the GLM models, have gotten better at these. So most of those models have been, quite big, right? So Kimi, you're looking at about something about 1 trillion parameters. Minimax, I think, is around about 240 from memory, uh, and with a certain amount active, that's much more sort of efficient. Probably still too big to run on your local machine for most people. So it will be interesting to see as we see the Qwen 3.5 family roll out much more. They've had lots of sizes. And do we get some distilled versions of those bigger models into smaller distillations that people are like, whoa, this is cool. I can run this on my, on my machine in Olama, in LLM Studio, and I can actually get, high performance out of it for, fully local stuff. We're already seeing that with companies where they're starting to have their own node of, say, 8 GPUs or something like that, run one of these bigger things, do their own fine tuning on it to have it customized for them. That's something that a lot of companies are now starting to realize, well, actually, that's good enough. And we don't want to spend the 100 grand, 200 grand a month on proprietary models. And more importantly, they don't want their data going out to those companies. Uh,
Yes.
so that's a big thing that that we're seeing now take off as well. And it's going to be interesting because like Google themselves introduced Gemini on-prem last year, but they didn't really push it, right? So do we start seeing, at Next in a couple of months that's something that gets a big push, right? Of the like, okay, now you can actually run some of these models on-prem, and we'll actually license, Gemini on-prem for you.
It is going to be interesting. When they announced Gemini on premise, I was looking at that going, did they just do what? They what? that seemed absolutely absurd to me, and I was convinced that I heard it wrong. But I didn't. That's definitely something they were going. And on the flip side of that, I guess, is a question of how much is AWS and Azure and Google saying, bring your model as a service and run it here. And, we guarantee it's going to be secure and private and it's your model and you control it. But we've got the hardware for you that maybe you don't want to buy locally. How much are you seeing companies interested in that?
I think, yeah, to a certain degree. Certainly, I know of companies where they have their own deal with OpenAI, or probably more with Azure, where they have an instance of one of the GPT models running sort of like uh, in what technically is an Azure data center, but it's like no one in Azure can get to it, right? It's literally in a cage. It's like, only people from the company can go in there and make changes, all that sort of stuff. So it's still technically on Azure owned land or whatever, kind of thing. But it is just for one company. And it's just for, their particular use case. The challenge becomes though, if you've got new models coming out every month, and you just sign a 6-month deal for, GPT 5.2, suddenly 3 months into GPT 5.5, and you're looking at your
Yeah.
5.2 going, gee, this is not the nice sexy car that I thought it was anymore. How do I renew the lease earlier and, get something better?
I think that's kind of an interesting question is, these three are all essentially model as a service, right? It's that they're offering you a nice API endpoint and this model guaranteed back there. And what happens when they start upgrading the models? How far we know, for example, that Gemini 2 is imminently about to be
Yeah.
turned off. And if I've done a lot of work around Gemini 1 2, it's not just I'll just, change the model string to 3 and hey, everything will be fine, right? Well, no. How much concern are you seeing there? And I guess the related question to that is kind of, as the newer models are coming on, are they kind of making that transition easier, at least among themselves? Was GPT 5.1, 5.2, 5.3 a relatively smooth transition?
I think there've been certainly a lot of people did not like GPT-5, right? So like people wanted their 4.0 model, they wanted all that sort of
Yeah,
stuff.
I
They've
remember that
taken all
now.
that out of the ChatGPT now, right? You've only got the 5 models now. Um, I think on the API you can still get 4.0, 4.0 mini, and those sorts of things. I and this kind of is a whole topic for another episode. Is that you're now starting to
Probably like our
see.
third or fourth whole topic for
Okay.
another episode.
I know, but you're now starting to see that the companies that have good evals and good prompt versioning and stuff like that, they're the ones that are able to basically change over reasonably quickly. And when we've been, at VentureBeat, when we've been interviewing some of these companies like, uh, you know, like LinkedIn, like LexisNexis, like Booking.com, you're seeing people that are leading those teams and the teams themselves really testing every model. That the moment a new model comes out, they've got their evals, they've got their prompts, and they just run it through, and they get a bunch of numbers back of like, oh, this model looks like it could be better, right? And then they start looking at the latency. They go through all of this, and clearly the ones that are moving very quickly have prepared really good evals, really good sort of test suites, so that they can spin up any model, test out any model, and then decide, okay, yes, we might change, or no, we're going to stick to this particular model. That is going forward not just for the proprietary models, but for the open models. So
Mhm.
where they're starting to work out that like actually for we've got 24 different tasks that we do with LLMs. These 17 can be replaced by this open model. These other 7, nah, we kind of need the like the pro model. We kind of need like a bit more intelligence for those ones still. And but that's a huge saving, right? Like
Yes.
the people don't
Well,
realize that.
I think one of the things that has frustrated me now for 2 years, it was actually one of the reasons I got involved in the LangChain project up front, was that it seemed to me that nobody was really saying, we're not writing prompts. We are writing this combination of model tuning parameters. At that time, temperature was important,
Yeah.
and prompt. And it's this whole combination that really we need to be managing together. And it didn't seem to me like anybody was really talking about that. So it's refreshing to hear that people who realize, yeah, there's going to be this constant churn and we need to be on top of it, have begun to understand that. But I still don't see any formal training or way of storing that information. Or, it seems to me like as developers, we're still teaching people, here's how you write a prompt. You have this string in your code with the model, and then you have this other string in your code that is the prompt. And that feels dangerous to me.
Yeah, like you definitely need some kind of prompt system, whether that's with for versioning, for evals,
Yeah.
for for testing that. Um, that's not going to change anytime soon, right? That's going to be like it is, and you definitely see the organizations. Obviously, a lot of organizations tend to have a preferred provider, whether that's like Azure, OpenAI, Google, Gemini, or sort of, or Anthropic is now on all three hyperscalers, right?
Right.
They're
I,
like, and that's probably a win for them, right? That they've done those deals. And
I
it
mean,
also,
what I was going to say there is, even if you've got a cloud provider now, it's easier for you to say, hey, can I switch between Gemini and Anthropic and GPT OSS? What's my one kind of universal platform that lets me do that, so I can get the best of every world?
you're not going to get every world though, because like obviously you're not going to
No,
get
you're not.
Gemini and GPT on the same kind of thing.
No. Yeah.
There are third parties that are doing that, right? That are
Well,
uh,
but I think also that's where LangChain has kind of positioned themselves, is we're the universal API.
yeah.
All you need to do is
Yeah.
swap this in, and magic happens.
It was interesting though that like I was kind of surprised talking to Harrison last week that they're definitely moving more to their focus being on the observability and tracing element of it, and less
Yes.
on the open frameworks, because they are seeing a lot more pressure from the when you control the harness and you control the model, you've got a massive advantage, right? Let's just
Right.
leave it at that.
I think also, and I'm not, I have no insight into Harrison's mind at all. I think also they've that's where they can make money. I mean,
Oh
you
yeah,
can't make
for
money
sure.
on an open
Yeah,
source framework anymore.
for
You
sure.
just
That's
can't.
totally true. Yes, totally true. Yeah. And yeah, and I think, but they've got some really nice ideas. I can't say what they've got coming out, but they've got some really nice ideas of like, things to make that observability and those traces better going forward
Yeah.
too. Right.
So Sam, this has been fantastic. We are going to
Okay.
need to do this again. Maybe we'll need to do this when we're at next, after whatever they announce
Yeah.
there.
Okay.
So I really look forward to it. Again, where can folks find you?
So probably the best thing is my YouTube. I mentioned the VentureBeat stuff. I do a bunch of things with VentureBeat. We do a podcast called Beyond the Pilot, talking about interviewing some really interesting people. Everyone from sort of like the security people at Mastercard through to people like Harrison Chase, of like how people are actually putting AI and putting agents into production for different things. So that's one thing. And yeah, probably my YouTube channel would be the other place.
Fantastic. Thanks again, Sam. It is great, and I really look forward to coming back another time on Two Voice
Pleasure.
Devs.
I look forward to it as well.